Hello, everybody. Thank you so very much for joining the stream today. Um, Before we start, I know that you have to be enrolled in the on Twitch or a member of Twitch to type in the comments. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them to Twitter. Okay, good. So what we're going to do today is we are going to look at how I code qualitative data in NVIVO. Okay, and NVIVO is a qualitative data analysis software. I would have to say it's not my favorite, but actually next weekend I'm going to do a video reviewing different qualitative data analysis packages. But NVIVO is basically the one my job pays for, so that is what I use. So I hope this will be useful, and for this we are going to use one of the three papers that we discussed last weekend, which is a paper that just got a revise and resubmit at MIS Quarterly. And for this paper is a very simple paper. It is basically a paper that uses a bunch of interviews to understand how people present data for their managers at work. Okay, so before we delve into the data and the analysis, I just want to show you the sort of the big frame for the paper, and here it is. Let me make this bigger. So basically, the idea of this paper is that information systems provide a specific set of data, and that there is, and what I argue is that there is a process whereby this data becomes the data that managers use for analysis. And the reason this process is needed is because not all of the data that IT provides, or let me put it another way, not all of the data that managers need to make decisions is provided by IT. So that's basically the motivation for this paper. Okay, good. So let's look at NVIVO. Okay, now if you think about what a qualitative data analysis software does, it basically does three things. The first thing is that it is a repository. So this is where you keep your files, but also where you keep your coding and so on. The second thing is that it is a coding mechanism, right? So it's basically a process that allows you to select specific bits of data and attach labels to those bits of data. That's what coding is all about. And then it is a reporting tool. So it allows you to produce reports from the data that you have analyzed. Okay, good. So that's basically what it does. So if you look at NVIVO, you have files where you keep your files, right? So and you do that by importing documents, as easy as that. Then you have codes, which is where you keep your codes, okay, and you can keep them in a structure like this, okay. And then you have the basically the coding tool, right? So if you want this data in French, so that's why you're not seeing the interviews. Sorry, let me just make sure. Oh, weird. Oh, there you go. Okay, and so for coding, for example, you'll see that I coded things here, right? And you see that there are multiple passages coded in the same way. Coding is very simple in NVIVO. You just pick up a passage, and you do code here, and you can just like either type the name for a code, so example, okay, and if I click here, it will create a new code named example, and it will code this like that. So I'll just do that. Okay, good. So if we go here, you'll see example is here, right? Good. Or what I can do is, as you progress through the document, you have a bunch of codes, right? And you just pick the one that you want, right? So if I pick this, like here, you see that it adds it to this, okay? And obviously you can code at the sentence level, at the word level, if you will, or if you want, at the paragraph level, or you can code like just a bunch of text. Okay, basically this is what qualitative analysis does. Okay, now then there's the reporting, and for reporting, basically what I do is, you know, if I'm, so this is the coding that I use for one of my papers, so, or for the paper. So if I click here, right, I have all the codes that are about correcting data, okay? So this is as simple as that. So you put the files in, you code each file, and then you have your codes reported, and you write a paper for the codes. Obviously, this is just the mechanics of coding, right? Now the question is, what codes do you use, right? What codes do you use? Okay, and I will tell you what I do. Okay, I'll tell you what I do. This is my preference, but I will tell you why this is a good preference. The reason this is a good preference is that I have never, ever, ever, in any paper that I submitted to a journal, very top, very bottom, very low, ever, had to change a line in my coding structure. Ever. The only time this happened was in something similar to this happened, because this never happened, was in my MISQ 2013 paper, where the reviewers asked me to add something called, you know, conditions for action or structure. I actually had coded for that, but I didn't put it into the paper just because, you know, you would just make the paper too big. And so, but then, you know, when reviewers give you the chance to do that, then yeah, of course, I'm more than happy to provide my entire coding. Okay, so I follow 2 rules to decide what codes that I use. 2 rules. First rule: all of my coding is arranged into according to practice theory. Okay, and practice theory is a super simple explanation of what happens in society, what happens in organizations, which says that basically the core experience and the core process through which social stability and social change, organizational stability and organizational change happen, the driving process to produce a specific outcomes are people's practices, what people do, okay? And obviously I don't want to go into practice theory in this video, but basically the good thing about practice theory is that it allows you to really integrate agency and structure, so people's free will, if you want to call it that, and, you know, the sort of like the social constraints and the organizational constraints that people's action have in a very elegant way. Okay, and so basically what you code for when you use practice theory is you code for practices, for what people do. Okay, and so what you see in this paper, okay, this is the final coding that I use for this paper. What you see is that these are a bunch of practices. So people correct data, collect data, calculate data, simulate trends, correct analysis, supplement data, customize analysis. These are all practices. These are all things that people do, okay? So that's how I code for every single paper. I code practices. Now, sorry about that. It's kind of a weird sleeping schedule this week, okay? Now, and so, because again, what I'm doing is I'm explaining how the analysis that IT provides is transformed into the analysis that managers need to make decisions, okay? So there you go. That's what I code for, practices, okay? Now, the way I code is done in 2+1 steps, okay? There are 2 that I do in NVIVO, okay? Which is here. What I do is I code everything, I just go through the data and put labels on anything that is relevant to what I'm trying to explain. So this is what I'm trying to explain. And so what I do is I go through the data and code for every process whereby the data that IT provides becomes data that is made available to managers, okay? And so, and you'll see that, this is super huge and super messy, right? And so what you need to do here is, what you're doing here is basically you're reducing the data that you need to analyze. Data reduction, that's the big first step. And so in this first step, I'm not like super worried about what I'm calling things, and if I'm coding the same thing with different names. I'm not really worried about that, right? What I'm worried about is highlighting the data that is relevant to address to use in the paper, okay? I put names, I could just put useful data here, but this just helps me engage more with the data. So remember, one of the videos on the channel is, can you publish in top journals without being a genius? And basically the answer is yes, but you have to do a lot more work, a lot more thinking. This is me doing a lot more work and a lot more thinking, just like, labeling things and, just trying to think through, the specifics, the practices, the concepts of what is going on here, okay? After I do this, okay, and you'll see, like, this is pretty messy, right? So you have practices, you have, almost like rules. You have conditions for action, like errors in analysis, feature match use. So there's a lot of stuff that, I know are not practices, I know are not like really going into the paper when I finally write it. But, this is just data that is going to inform my thinking, okay? Now, the second step, so after I go through all of the interviews in this case, after I go through all of the interviews, and and I do all the codes, what I do is I just group them, right? Now, practice theory in general follows a simple model, which is a model of practices are responses to specific conditions for action, to specific challenges under specific conditions for action that produce specific outcomes, right? So you'll have the challenges, conditions for action, and the outcomes here, okay? And then everything else is basically practice, okay? So I do this first grouping again to help me engage with the material, okay? Now, how do we move from this huge amount of codes, okay? huge amount into this, right? It's very simple. It's very simple. You're basically counting things, okay? So the first thing that I do is I go to this column, which is references, and this is the number of times this code appears in the data, okay? So this means that I coded 9 paragraphs or sentences with the code enlist the help of other department, and I have coded this across 6 documents, okay? Here I just have 1 code in 1 document, obviously, 2 codes in 1 document, 13 codes in 9 documents, 22 codes in 10 documents, and so on and so forth, okay? So I look at this, and basically, let me see, yeah. You can actually like sort this, okay? I'll sort by name, just to be useful. So you can actually sort this, and what I'll do is I look at anything that has less than the average number of instances, okay? So, for example, here, what's our average? Well, our max is 22, right? So the average is 11. So I'll look at any code that has less than 11. And obviously there's always a code that has the exact average that will make me look at it twice, okay? So, anything that has very few references, like 1 or 3 or something, means one of 2 things. Either this is not relevant, okay? That's just it's just something that is not having an impact. It's not a common practice. It's not a common outcome or an interesting condition for action. So, I'll just take it out in my final coding structure. Or it could be something that, I coded with different names, and so I need to aggregate them into a code, okay? And so that's what I do, okay? So if we go to the final coding that I use for the paper, you'll see that everything has a relatively nice number here, and obviously there will be things that like don't happen very much just because they're unique cases. This is also not a huge data set, but this is also why you actually need to read. So you're not supposed to like just delete everything below the average, right? You need to read and make sure, because maybe it's something that happened once even, and it's like super interesting, right? So imagine it's the one time where people in the interview confess that they sent the wrong report to their manager, okay? Now, something that is useful here and that you'll see is that none of these codes, even the very small ones, so this one with 3 and this with 6, none of this are happening in just one interview, okay? That just gives me, I don't use it as a hard and fast rule, but again, you can have a very unique case, but it just gives me some assurance that it's not just you one person discussing this. Okay, now this is the analysis in NVIVO. Okay, so what I use NVIVO for is basically to come up with practices. That's it. Okay, so this is a list of practices. The way I do this is I go to first data reduction. So I select the data that is relevant for the paper. Then I go to a process of code reduction. So that is like, okay, let me look at the codes that only happen once and let me group together. And then third, I try to make sense of these groups in some way. Now, you can think about 2 ways of making sense of the final set of codes that you have. I like to go very empirically, okay? Really ground myself in what is happening with the data. And there's a very good reason for that. The reason is that if you don't go empirical, so if you need to build some sort of structure, you need to use some sort of theory to do that. And that makes the paper more complex. It adds a framework, a frame to the paper that you have to discuss and explain to reviewers. Okay, if you keep it this way, right? So if you look at, for example, at this set of practices, it's basically about people getting data, processing data, and sending that data to their managers. This is a process that just makes sense, right? It just describes what people do. There's no theory, there's no framing, nothing. It's just a process, okay? And this is why I don't get a lot of debate from reviewers. It's because I write my practices in as simple a way as I can. And you can see that in the other papers that we've been discussing, same thing, right? Same thing. So, that's how I do it. Now, there's a third way to do it that I hate. And this is something that NVIVO actually allows you to do. Let me see if I can do this. Code analyze query. Yeah, it's here in cross tabulation. You can basically. I confess I've never. I don't know how to do this because I've never done it because I don't think it's very good. But you can basically cross-tabulate codes with one another, and do some sort of like cluster analysis to see what codes co-occur and so on, and then use that to group codes. I don't like that, right? Because I think that when you do qualitative research, you really need to learn from your participants, and you're really explaining a phenomenon, okay? So that's why I don't use a cross tabulation, but you can use it if you think it's useful. Cross tabulation is, I think, especially useful if you have a bunch of outcomes and you want to link practices to outcomes. But then, I reviewed papers like this. This is almost like quasi-quantitative papers. And, there's a lot lost in those papers because people then want to report their tables with their percentages, and, the data just gets lost there. And what sells a qualitative paper is the data, really. Okay, good. So we have the coding structure. So we are on step 2, okay, the +1 step. Okay, and this is why I say this is my special recipe. So I had a professor at MIT who taught us introduction to research methods. Her name is Lottie Bailey. And Lottie Bailey said something in class once that really stuck with me, which is your first draft is still part of the analysis. So when you're writing the first draft of your paper, you're actually not writing the paper, you're still doing data analysis, okay? So what I want to do is I want to show you my notes of the first draft of this paper that we've been discussing, okay? Let me just say hi to chat. Hello, chat. Thanks for joining. So, let's see. Where's the paper among all these things? It is here. Okay, good. So, what you see that I've done is I have, remember I told you that the great thing about Scrivener is that you can have all different things in research. So actually, you'll see this is the exact coding structure that we just saw in NVIVO, and I just have it here, okay? And what I do with this is quite simply, is I first go through all of the quotes and I select those that are very good. Those are the green quotes. Those that are so-so, orange quotes, and those that are bad, the red quotes. By the way, let me give you a super cool tip that I came up with myself during my PhD that helped me a lot, which is when you're coding qualitative data and you see a cool quote, code for it. So I always have a code in my data for something called the quotable quotes, which are quotes that are really good. So for example, now I'm working on a paper with a co-author, and we have an interview quote saying, they told us that we are dirt in the ground, and then we have data about the respondent basically rubbing their shoe on the ground to show what dirt is really like. You really, if you have them, there's like more colorful quotes are super good for papers. They sell the paper. So if you have that's just make sure you make notes of this. So basically, this is the export, and this just basically helps me decide what quotes I'm going to use in the data. Okay, and obviously I didn't use all of the Greek quotes because those are huge. It will be a huge paper, but it just helps me go through. See here, I just have like one good quote. Okay, here I have a couple more. Here I have a few more. So this just helps me then write the results, and I can show you. See, I have correcting erroneous and missing data, collecting additional data, and then I'm splitting here, right? Collecting qualitative data. Okay. So what does this mean, right? So you see, for correct, I have correcting erroneous and missing data. That's it, right? So there's a one-to-one match here. But for collecting data, right? When I was, let me just split the screen here so I can show you. When I was going through the quotes here, okay, I noticed that there is stuff about where is this? Yeah, so there's stuff about collecting quantitative data, but there's also stuff about collecting qualitative information here. Okay, and so I just moved it around and added it here. Okay, good. Then we go down to producing analysis, and what you see is that I've actually changed the codes a lot. So I don't have simulating trends, correcting analysis, supplementing data with personal insight. I have producing alternative measurements, adding a layer of interpretation that I kept, and simulating that I kept. Okay, so you see that I added an entire new code here, but based on the data that I had already coded under a different name. Okay, so I am still doing interpretation while I am writing the paper. And is this just miscoding? Is it just something that I could have done while I was coding the data? Perhaps, but I think that just the process of writing, of engaging with the material, of going back to to the theory section, reading papers, just really helps you do this. Okay, so again, the point is that when you're writing the results section, you're not like simply transcribing your coding structure for NVIVO here. Okay, it is an additional interpretive step an additional analytical step. Okay. Now, there's a lot of talk in. I'll just see if there's something in chat. There's a lot of talk in on qualitative research about it being iterative and that you go back and forth from literature and the data. I have never ever seen somebody do this. Okay, when people code data, they just sit down and code data. They're not going back to papers. Okay, this is why writing the first draft is part of the analysis, because when you write the first draft, you're writing for your analysis. You're going through the literature. You're trying to get the framing right, and then you'll think, well, you know, if this is the model that I use in the theory, then I have to do this thing in the discussion, and if I want to do this thing in the discussion, then maybe I need to change my results a little bit more. Okay, here we are being iterative. Here we are engaging with the theory. Here we are changing the coding and the coding and theory and the papers and the overall framing and the frameworks that we are using, such as practice theory. Okay, that is why it is so important for your first draft to be analysis, because this is when you are truthfully iterating between theory and data. Nobody iterates between theory and data when you're coding. When you're coding, you're just going through, you know, hundreds of observations, hundreds of interviews, and doing it. Okay. Good. So we got to the half-an-hour mark. This was sort of like an overall introduction to the process. I hope it was useful. I maybe begin to do some more tutorial type videos about how to use NVIVO and show you some of the more fancy tools. But for next weekend, what I'll do is special, because I don't know if everybody has funding from their university to use qualitative data analysis software. So next week, we're actually going to go through 2 completely free, lifetime free qualitative analysis packages. I have used both, and we'll discuss which one should you use and what are the advantages of one or the other. Okay. Until then, thanks so much for watching. If you're seeing this on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe. I will be posting daily through Christmas, but I will be doing some travel, so there may be a couple of days where I won't post. Okay. In the meantime, please keep safe, and I'll catch you on Monday. Thank you so much. Gabriel, if you're still here, about the levels of coding. So question here on chat, Gabriel asking, do you prefer using 2 or 3 levels of coding? So the way I do it is it's basically around papers, okay, about the way papers are structured. So I begin with practices, right? And sometimes, like in this results section here, right? Sometimes you can get away with 2 levels of coding. Okay, so the result section of this paper is the upward flow of analysis at Fashion Co, right? So that's not the code, that's just like the title of the result section. Okay, and then also I have a first level of coding, which talks about a stage in a process. So this is about improving data, right? Then we have analyzing data, and then we have providing reports, and then there are practices for each of them. Okay. So this is 2-level coding, right? You have the practices. Practices are grouped into bigger categories, and that's it. Now, if I recall correctly, in my 2013 paper, I had enough variation, enough differences among practices that I needed an additional level, but I do that more to help the reader or the reviewers rather to help than because I think I need it for the coding, I need it for the analysis. It just helps me break the paper a little bit more, and that's it. Okay, so to answer the question, normally I use 2, but if I just have too many practices that I need to divide them in some way to make the paper easier to read, I use 3. Good, excellent. So thanks so much. Thanks for the question, Gabriel, and I'll catch you guys next time. Thank you so much.